found out that the Sony A6100 has been discontinued, but is it still an option in 2022? Let's find out.
They don't think we can keep making hits about cameras, but I'm the cameraman. But I'm the cameraman. Stay creamy. Yeah, started on a 50 mil lens.
Hey, if this is your first time coming to the channel, I'd like to welcome you. This is Lessons Learned with Cameras. My name is Willie. So today I'm out at one of my local parks and I wanted to test the Sony A6100 to see if this is still an option in 2022. So this whole vlog is going to be shot, or this whole segment is going to be shot on the Sony A6100 paired with the Sigma 16mm f1.4 just for the talking head part. Then when I start to walk, I'll go ahead and switch lenses to one that has optical steady shot in there or some type of stabilization. So the purpose of this video is to kind of take the Sony A6100 through some tests and see if this is still something that someone who's considering getting into the Sony lineup, wanting to have a camera that has some options, could they possibly purchase this camera and be able to use it and get great results with it. Now, with everything going on with the chip shortage and not being able to get your hands on a Sony ZV-E10, this may still be an option for you in 2022. I wanted to kind of take it out and just show you some of the possibilities with this camera, what it can do. Some of it's, oh man, this ain't gonna work with these birds over here. Okay, just like with every segment, I think we should go over the pros and cons of the Sony A6100. Some of the pros first. Lightweight. This camera only weighs a little bit more than a point and shoot camera. A lot of it depends on what lens you pair it up with. If you're using a kit lens, I mean, you're not going to have an issue with weight problems, getting tired in your hand, and so forth. Cost. This camera does not cost that much on the secondary market, if you can find it, because nowadays it's harder to find this camera than what it was a year ago. I've seen this camera sometime as low as $550, but crazy thing about it is I've seen this camera up to $1,000 paired with accessory kits. Would I pay $1,000 for it? No, would not pay $1,000 for this camera. But if I could get it at a good price point, definitely on the secondary market, a camera that was gently used, it wouldn't be a bad option. You have the option of using interchangeable lenses. Now, interchangeable lenses come anywhere from the kit lens. I mean, I like to use the 1650. I also use the 18-135, and also the Sigma 16mm f1.4 if I'm doing talking head videos like this. I look at this camera as a good learning camera. When I wanted to get into the mirrorless cameras and using interchangeable lenses, this was the first camera that came to mind. Now, I also looked at this one, the 6400 and the 6600. I'm not going to really talk about the ones that were the first generations, the 6000, the 6300 or 6500. But between those three cameras, 6100, 64, 6600, this one was more or less what I felt comfortable with starting, just to see if I was going to be interested in it, if I was going to like it, if it was something that I wanted to grow into or not. Now let's talk about some of the cons. First one, there's no in-body stabilization. Without having in-body stabilization, you lose the option of being able to have the choices of using a lens like this, the Sigma 16mm, and walking around with it without having a gimbal. I think it kind of limits you to your lens choices. Whenever I used to look for lenses for this particular camera, I always had to keep in mind if the lens had optical steady shot or had any type of optical stabilization built within the lens. So that kind of limited me to some of my choices for lenses that I wanted to use, whether it was just shooting landscape, shooting portraits, or just vlogging with it. Biggest con, and I noticed it today and I almost forgot about this, was the battery. Battery life is horrible in this camera. I'm already on my second battery right now. I didn't even know if I was going to do this segment of the video outside here because I only brought 2 batteries with me, but just to let you know, you're going to have a couple of these Z50 batteries on you if you're planning on vlogging. And if you're planning on going out all day and doing it, you better be prepared to at least have 4 of these Z50 batteries. The only plus side to that is these batteries aren't that expensive. No picture profiles. Now, for someone who likes color correcting or color grading their footage, that's going to be an issue. Okay, there's no growth there. You can't grow into that with this camera. I used to think in the beginning that that was always a plus for me, but again, the more I play with cameras, the more familiar I get with them, the more I want to learn. You know, picture profiles would have been good to have in this camera, but again, at its price point, I understand why Sony didn't put it in there, because if picture profiles was in this camera, then it would make the 6400 obsolete. It's kind of windy out here today. Well, let's talk about who this camera's for still in 2022. This camera is for someone who's on a budget, who want to be able to have the ability to upgrade lenses or to use interchangeable lenses. Some things I still like about the Sony A6100, its reliability. Never had an issue with this camera. Always able to get the shots. Very easy to put into action. No issues with that. So let's talk about who this camera probably isn't for. I think this camera isn't for someone who needs in-body stabilization. We all know the 6100 doesn't have that. So pretty much you're limiting yourself to always using lenses with optical steady shot or some type of optical stabilization in them. And we all know most of the times, if you're limited to those type of lenses, for an APS-C crop sensor camera, it's probably going to be some type of a lens with a variable aperture. Oh my God, it's so windy out here. Hope this is picking up. Oh, I've got to tell you what I'm using for today. Today is the Sony Bluetooth grip, using a Rode old school wireless mic and A6100. So I'm going to test it with 3 different lenses. First one being the one that's on here now, which is the kit lens. So you kind of get to see what the kit lens can do in ideal conditions with good light. So I'm going to switch right now, and I'm going to put the 18-135 on here, and we're going to see what that looks like. Okay, now this is the 18-135. A little bit of a crop. This is the full frame equivalent of 27 millimeters. Not bad. This lens also has optical stabilization. Again, just showing you different options you can use with this camera. Most of them are going to be ones that the lens is optically stabilized. Personally, I'll probably shoot more with 18-135 than I do the regular 16-50 kit lens, just because it gives me more flexibility with range, being the 135 is about equivalent to 200 millimeters full frame. So this is at 18 millimeters. 35 millimeters. So that's 70 millimeters. And this is 135. It's hard for me to tell. What do you think about the stabilization? It looks like it's pretty stable, but man, every time I get home and put everything in editing, stuff looks shaky. Okay, so this is the Sigma 16mm f1.4. I am using a variable ND filter. So I know usually I told you I'm not a big fan of ND filters, but because when you're using the Sigma with the f1.4 to get that subject separation or that subject isolation in your pictures, you know, if you use a variable ND filter, that way you're able to keep it at f1.4 and still be able to have that that good subject separation. Again, you can't do a lot of walking around because the lens has no optical stabilization. The body of the camera don't have any type of in-body stabilization. So, but again, you know, this is just to show you some of the picture quality you can get out of this camera. This lens becomes more useful if you're at home doing talking head videos. Sorry about the geese in the back, but I also had to crank my shutter up. Shutter's 1/200 right now, even with the variable ND filter. So I put the kit lens back on here again so I could walk around a little bit. But yeah, that was, again, just to give you a little taste of some of the lens options with this camera. Don't want to focus too much on lenses today, just really talking about this camera and some of the features that this camera still have that are still useful in 2022. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and do the internal audio test. I try to find a spot that's kind of out of the wind because it's really windy out here. So this is the external audio with the Rode wireless mic. So I'm about to use the internal audio. So this is the internal audio. How does that sound? I know it's super windy out here. I know you can hear more of the background noises, like you can hear the geese and everything, so. So I'm not really going to do a night test or low light test because I would really be testing lenses. And again, this video is just on the 6100 itself. I'll do that in another video. But overall, this is pretty much the basic functionality of the 6100. functions like any other camera. Because of learning on the RX100, it made it a lot easier for me to switch and start using the 6100 with no issues. It's a very intuitive menu system, but once you get used to it, I mean, it's like any other Sony camera. It's no big deal. This menu system is no different than my FX3 or A7C or anything like that. If this camera at least had the ability to record gyro data, I think hands down I would have continued to use this camera more often in my workflow. So I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that this camera is perfect, not even close. But it's definitely a good entry-level camera if you're trying to get into the Sony ecosystem. If you want to have a camera that has interchangeable lenses, this is definitely a good start with that. Then we come to the question, is this camera still relevant in 2022? Because of the circumstances with the chip shortage, I would say yes, this camera is still relevant in 2022. Even though it's been discontinued, you run a better chance in finding this camera on the secondary market than you would a ZV-E10. And if you do find a ZV-E10, it's going to be some ridiculous run-up price of this camera. I've seen it anywhere from $900 for the body all the way up to like $1,500 with kit lens and body included. So I know that's a price run-up. And again, I mean, if I could get away with using my 6100, I would. So, you know, I just couldn't see paying that type of money for not even a secondary camera, just an APS-C replacement camera. But with the chip shortage being in play, that's what makes this camera relevant now in 2022. If that wasn't going on, if you ask me, was this camera still relevant? I would say no, because of some of the shortcomings. With no IBIS, with no picture profiles, I mean, this camera is kind of null and void, not with being able to have gyro data recorded. You know, this camera is starting to show its age a lot more. But then again, to its defense, so is the 6400 and so is the 6600. That's pretty much it. I'm gonna wrap it up. Remember, if you like content like this and want to see more of it, make sure you hit that subscribe button, give me a like, and I'll definitely be putting out more. I try to do it once a week. And again, let me know in the comment section if you still feel the Sony A6100 is still relevant in 2022. All right, talk to you later.